All right, welcome to Intro to Technology 1023. We're going to be going over CSS today. So, what CSS stands for is Cascading Style Sheets. This allows for styling in your web page. Mostly HTML and CSS are going to be used here. There are other CSS-like languages for things like Android, iOS development. However, CSS is web styling. Okay, so CSS is based on what is known as style rules, and then a subset of that style rule is the weight of that rule. We'll get into that towards the end of this lecture here. Okay, so like we were talking about before in the HTML lecture and then the HTML demonstration, attributes is how you communicate between CSS and HTML and then JavaScript and HTML. So for CSS, if you're going to address something by ID, it's this hashtag symbol here, or pound symbol if you're old like me. Okay, so pound or hashtag, form container, and then we're telling that form container to be light gray as a background color. All right, so if I bring your attention down here, here's that attribute, ID of form container, and then it's on the form tag. Okay, so it is quite literally that simple. Give it an attribute, address it in CSS with this pound symbol. Pound symbol, which says ID, find me this ID, form container. ID equals form container. So this form tag, set that background color to light gray. And that's the result. Okay, that is a light gray background color. CSS rule by class. Okay, so the class symbol in CSS is a dot. So that is right here, dot. And then we're looking for the class of button. So class of button. Well, if we come back down here to the HTML, well, right here's that attribute, class equals button, and that happens to be on a anchor tag. All right, class of button on the anchor tag. And then we're saying, hey, we want this to do a bunch of things. We want text decoration to go away, which is the default style set by the browser. We don't want that padding of 1%. We'll get into what those are here in a second. Background color of dark sea green, and then border radius of 10 pixels. All right, so that gives you this. So far, so good. Pretty simple. This is less simple. Okay, so pseudo class. By concepts, it is relatively easy to understand if you understand what abstractions are or states are. Okay, so same thing as before. So we're still looking for a button or a class of button. And then this colon here signifies a pseudo selector. Now, there are only a handful of these that you're going to end up using on a regular basis. Hover is by far the most common. Okay, so hover, pseudo selector of hover, we want a transition duration, and then we're going to change that button to green yellow. Now, what hover stands for in terms of a concept is when my mouse goes over a button and I haven't clicked it, I'm quite literally hovering over it. This, I want that to change to green yellow. I want to change that background color to green yellow, and I want to do it relatively slowly at half a second. That is a state. And you have to get used to thinking of things as states in web, because most of the things that you're going to want to do from a functionality standpoint, particularly when you get into JavaScript, is going to be state dependent. This is a state of hover. When I'm hovering over this button, change the background color to green yellow. Hopefully that made sense. So we're still addressing the same anchor tag, right? And this is what that ends up looking like. So there's the original color, that dark sea green. When I hover over it, is that bright green. Dark sea green, bright green. Okay, pseudo class. Here is a partial list of all of them. All right. You're not going to use most of these. Okay. I've used first child a couple times. I use hover over all the time, focus occasionally, last child occasionally, everything else, nth child I've used occasionally. Other than that, I haven't really used these. And again, I've been saying this quite a bit when we've gotten into the web portion here. Don't try to memorize these. Don't try to make this procedures. It's not going to work because you're not going to use these often enough to have it completely memorized as a process. What you do need to do is understand that these things exist and be relatively aware enough that you probably forgot all of them. You just need to know that pseudo classes exist, that state dependent actions through CSS is a possibility, and it's called a pseudo class. Okay, hopefully that made sense. But over here is the link to pseudo classes if you need them. Okay, CSS rule by tag or element. Now I'm going to, before I actually tell you what this is, I have to point out that unless you absolutely have to do this, don't. It's not very efficient. It forces the parser to parse the entire DOM to find all these tags. So if you're just doing div, that's incredibly inefficient. There are scenarios where if you want to step into an object because you need more weight and you need 4 or 5 divs to get there, that's a little bit different because there's only so many conditions where that matches. But as soon as you start going all divs, all anchors, all spans, all headers, all anything that sounds like, hey, I'm doing it to everything that exists on the DOM, is very inefficient. So be very aware that there are performance penalties if you do it like this, and that there needs to be a good reason why you're doing it like this. So that little mini rant over, let's talk about tags and elements. So you can quite literally just type the tag. So tag selector of a div, I'm going to change that color to violet. Color in this case means text color. And right here's a div. Okay, it's going to get this div as well. So we got this one, and this is part of the reason why it's inefficient. It's also not very precise. Bang. 2 divs, 2 tags. It's a thing, it's a tool, right? You wouldn't use a saw as a hammer. You use your tools correctly. Right? So what styles are there? Now, very much like the HTML portion, this little column of everything that CSS has to offer is quite long, and I would like to point out that this little bar is still there. So you're seeing about a third of the possibilities of CSS. And once again, I do not have time to go over all of them. I have given you the primary concepts to extrapolate on though. So as long as you know that the documentation's there, that these sections are there, that these things exist, you can Google it and solve those problems for yourself. And most of development in general is about that. Hey, here's a handful of things, here's a handful of tools. I'm going to use these tools in a particular way to create this thing. There is no procedure. I'm going to be saying that a lot. There is no procedure. You have to understand the concepts and you have to apply them. You have to extrapolate on those ideas to create something that did not exist before. There is no procedure. All right. F12 for developer view. We went over this a little bit in the demonstration for HTML, but we can go over it again. That's going to give you some developer tool access to troubleshoot as things get more complicated. Okay, debugging CSS. All right. CSS Inheritance. Okay, so the cascading nature of CSS is within the document and between document. So as you include a CSS file, and it's the first one that you include, if you have a second file that's under it and it addresses the same element, that element, unless the first document had a higher weight, that element is going to get overwritten. So that's what this inheritance is. Okay, so inherited down here, inherited from HTML, font size, font family, because we're not addressing that anymore throughout the cascading nature. We never addressed font family. Um, it's going to stick with that font because it's going to inherit whatever it had from its parent. Okay. This one right here as well, div container margin top. This got the color of violet, which we did set, and then we readdressed it with class of button. Okay. All right. There is that. So this also and this is a color of black. All right. So a color of black. This also brings up a concept of CSS priority or CSS weight. A ID is weighted the highest. A class is next. A tag is least weighted. You can add multiple one of these together. So you can have a bunch of classes, you can have a bunch of IDs stepping into that element. You can have a bunch of tags and then one ID at the end. You can do something like that. CSS is very flexible regarding how you address these elements. They just want you to address an element. But CSS priority is relatively important when you get into highly complex layout. So a little bit of a personal story. I worked for a company that used a framework, a e-commerce framework called Magento. Magento is not particularly well organized anymore, and a lot of the HTML element on there have multiple IDs and multiple classes. And it just depends on which page you are, if that is a problem or not. So what you end up doing as a developer quite often, especially if you're doing custom styles, is you end up having to put a significant amount of weight on the styles that you are applying, because the only other solution to that is to add a important tag, and that gets out of hand very, very quickly. And there's a reason why I haven't shown you that. So what you can do is add multiple IDs as long as it's nested correctly, and that's going to have a higher weight than whatever Magento in this case had on their styles. So if you end up in the web development field and you end up working for a company like that that uses frameworks like that, the ones that have been poorly optimized, it's something that you have to account for and consider. And with that company, and at the time, and the reason why I'm bringing this up now in intro is because quite literally every single developer that was there at the time didn't know what this was. They just knew that, hey, if you had a bunch of divs on top of this thing you actually tried to target, it works. So who cares? Who cares if I actually understand it or not? So they wasted a lot of CPU cycles. Their performance wasn't very good. And obviously, it's not just this, but it's definitely part of it. So yeah, a little bit of a personal story there of why CSS priority is a thing. Definitely something you want to be aware of, and it is part of the cascading nature of CSS. Okay, I already ranted about this, about the score itself. Okay, so that top orange box here, so this one right here, input and button, that's going to have a higher priority than just button because we have two classes here instead of one. So this is going to prioritize this, over prioritize this dark sea green that got applied first, and then we're going to override it with this dark blue because we have multiple classes here, and this is the result of that. Obviously the contrast isn't very good, but it is a example of the weight and the priority and the scoring of CSS. Okay, so that's going to do it for the CSS itself. For the intro course that we're talking about right now, we are not going to go over Flexbox and CSS Grid. We think it's outside of the scope for the course, especially with the time that we have and for the work that we're expecting out of you. So we're not going to be going over mobile responsiveness or any of the Flexbox or CSS Grid mobile responsive paradigms. So with that said, demonstration for the CSS is coming up. And then after that, we'll do a brief overview of databases. We're not going to be doing anything with databases. We just need to expose you to it. for when you have your database course, which is next semester. If you're here at Alfred State, if you're online, then obviously not. But yeah, with that said, I will see you guys in the demonstration for CSS, and we'll be continue to work with the Trek bicycle thing that we were starting with. So see you then. All right, welcome back. We're going to go over some of the general CSS things that we covered in the lecture portion, just so we have a better handle on what's actually happening over here. So I am going to open up this index in HTML file. Okay, so I'm just going to hit go live here to show where we left off at from before, and I'm going to close this. All right, so here we go. We have trek bikes, road bikes, Medone, and I think it's Amanda, and then content one, content two. So we have this. All right, well, one of the things that I pointed out before is that these right now are stylized by the header tags, which I already pointed out that is not particularly awesome. And then on top of that, we should probably add at least a couple of styles. It's probably not going to look very good just because we're limited on what we have. We're not going to go over any of the Flexbox styles with this. Actually, we probably should. Yeah, we probably should. I just won't require a mobile view. So I'll do another CSS lecture on Flexbox and CSS Grid. But yeah, we'll handle just some of the basic styles here. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up, and then I'm going to add another folder. So another folder, and then I'm going to call it styles. And then inside of that folder, I'm going to do index.css. Now, Visual Code is going to open up that file for us because it's assuming that, hey, if we made it, we probably want to put something in there. For the time being, I don't want to do that. I want to come back to HTML. I'm going to come to this head tag here. And now I'm going to use a new tag that you guys have not been exposed to yet, and it's a link tag. This link tag is going to import our CSS file so we can actually use those styles. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to use an attribute called href. Now, href is going to the property of href, the attribute of href is essentially asking for where is this CSS located? Where is this located? Okay, well, it just so happens to be in styles. And then the name of the file is index.css. Okay. And now I'm going to close this tag real quick. So I'm going to close it. The other thing I'm going to do, and this isn't going to work. Okay. Actually, let's come over here and just to prove that it's not going to work, I am going to, what's a class? Let's go header one. All right, header one, color of red. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this. And notice that this flashed over here. So this should be incorporated and that my header one is not red. It is not red. So if I come over here, okay, and I come over to network, and then I save the force a refresh on our little temporary server here, we get, that's a favcon. Where is the error message? Okay, where's the CSS? Okay, that is appropriate. No, favcon. Okay, this might be a little small problem with the live server. I might be doing something wrong though. So what I was trying to show there was that the fact that, okay, we got this, we got that. That makes sense. That's how we do images. That makes sense. Why is that not working? So I wanted to come to the docs. So if I do HTML link tag, come up to link tag, and our first example here is link. We have href over here for styles.css, but we don't have this. So unfortunately, this tag is used for multiple things. We have to tell it what it's actually used for. So we are missing this relation, and this is going to be a style sheet like so. I'm going to save. I'm going to come back here. This is still not red. Now we actually have a problem. Class header 1. Okay, let's come back over here. Header 1. That is fine. Okay. Layout, computed, change. I got nothing on class of header 1. Okay, href, style. So one of the reasons why I keep these problems in the video is because it shows you guys that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this for, you're always going to run into issues. And you have to be able to troubleshoot them. Okay, so they don't have the self-closing backslash on this. It shouldn't matter. I have neglected that in the past and it's been fine. So just to make me feel better, I'm going to do this, come back over here, see if that changed, and that is a no. Okay. For the sake of sanity, I'm going to copy this, go and come back over here. I'm going to paste. That did not change. I'm going to save this again. Refresh. Okay, so that's not the problem. Link, href, styles, index. Okay. Let's try an ID. Check road container. We need to make sure that this CSS file is actually getting into the browser, because up to this point, it doesn't seem like it is. So I'm going to do background color of aqua, make it nice and obvious. Okay, refresh. Okay, it does seem very much like we're not getting that file. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do as a troubleshooting technique is I'm going to get out of this. Disposing, go live. Okay, now that's closed. What I'm going to do is right click on this. I'm going to open or reveal in File Explorer. And I'm going to click on this, and this is going to bring up a file version of this thing. And I am noticing that this is not red and none of this is blue. So I definitely have a problem somewhere. Okay. Head link is right there. Okay, I found the problem. I am going back to live. Okay, so my problem is that I misspell style sheet. I also want to point out that there was no error, there was nothing. One of the problems with web development is that there are going to be a lot of times where you're going to have a problem and it's going to be because of something like this, where it's just not spelled right, but you're not going to get an error. So for the people that are walking into this from like a programming background where basically if you make an error that your IDE is going to catch it for you, HTML and CSS and even a good bit of JavaScript, that's not going to be true. You're going to have to be able to look at this and go, something's wrong. And you have to understand the concepts. You have to understand how these things are working so you can actually troubleshoot it properly. Now that we have the style sheet corrected, we have our blue, we have our red, that is working. I'm going to get rid of this so we can go back to what we were trying to do. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to open up my little developer panel, and then I'm just going to use my developer panel to reference our IDs and classes from here. So we have header 1, header 1. Okay. So I'm going to break one of my rules, and I'm going to explain why that is. So the HTML tag, because it's at the very, very top of the DOM, and there's one HTML tag, this will be found immediately. You don't have to parse the entire DOM to find the HTML tag, okay? Unless you have an iframe, but that's a different problem. So here's your HTML page or tag. So I'm going to do font family. Okay, and then I'm going to do Arial because why not? That's what we always use, it seems like. Arial and Helvetica. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save at this point and then notice the font changes once I save. Okay, significant font changes. The next thing I'm going to do is on header 1, I'm going to change the font size. And I'm going to go, let's go 4VW. Okay. Not quite right. So one of the things that we can do once we go, okay, well, it's working, but it's not quite right. So if I come over here, header 1, the CSS should have updated compute. So that should have been over here. Interesting. Okay, there it is now that I reactivated it. Okay, that's fine. So here we go. Font size, I could go up from here. I'm just using the arrow keys. Okay, that's a 5. That's a 6. I think I want this at a 6. So, okay, cool. 6. I can do something similar with the other ones. Header 2. Header 3. And I'm just going to step down by 1. Okay. Oh. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to group these together. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to minimize them for the time being, just to have a little section here. Now, before we get too far into this, I'm going to start adding comments because I haven't really covered that. And it is relatively important, especially with new developers walking into a code base. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, there is a shortcut for comments. It is Control-K-C. Okay, that's going to give you a little bracket here. And then I'm going to call this general. I'm going to come down here. Headers. All right, I'm doing this mostly because to show you that it's possible, but when you get into logical chunks of things that actually exist, these comments become much more meaningful in all phases, the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript. So here we go. We got that. We have our headers. Let's go ahead and refresh here. And we have this. One thing I'm noticing right now is that H2 is bigger than H1. That is not particularly great. So that is a visual hierarchy problem if you get into the designer world. And it is not immediately apparent why that would be. Okay. So one of the things I've noticed about these live servers, hot server type stuff, is that okay, yeah, you can do everything right, but it doesn't update correctly. Okay. It is helpful overall. I do use it when it's beneficial to do so, but don't be so fooled by these. Oh, this changed back. Okay. So maybe I just didn't save it. Who knows? Okay. So there's that. I got my headers. These are in about the right order of what we're looking for. So now what I am interested in is okay, we got our check container here. We have our header 2 for road. Now I want to indent both of these containers in. And this is part of the reason why we have the containers themselves. However, I don't want to address both of these by IDs. What I want to do is address these by class because it's just a little bit simpler. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. We're going to add a class. And we're going to call this bike type container. All right. Bike type container. Now I'm going to make that smaller. I'm also going to copy this because I don't want to run into any problems. I'm going to create a little section here with a comment header container. Okay, and this is going to be a class. And then we want padding here. So the difference between padding and margin is margin is going to physically move the object inside of its container. Because we don't have any type of flexbox or CSS grid on here, we could use margin here. I don't think we're going to. I use padding quite a bit, and I use margin when I have to, when I actually want to just move something. I'm going to use padding though. So padding left, 5%. And what this is going to do is say, hey, add some space without actually moving the object. So make the object smaller within the container. Okay, so we're going to do that from the left. We're going to save that, and notice that this is bumped over now. For the sake of demonstration, I will comment that out. I'll make this a margin left, and notice it does the same thing. Okay, under this scenario, that's true. Under most scenarios, that is not true. So, okay, so we got our little padding here. We're doing pretty good. Let's go ahead and change the font color on this, just to add a little bit of a distinguishing factor here. Let's go back here, H3 header. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, instead of addressing the H3 itself, this is a good scenario to address multiple classes. So I'm going to go sub header. Okay. There's that. Save, come back to our CSS. Sub header. And then we are going to go with color. And we're going to need a relatively dark color. Let's go with a darker violet. Or dark blue. We can go dark blue. Madone, Amona. All right. Doing pretty good. There's that. Now, these images, well, they're pretty square. Now, a lot of websites have rounded corners, and a lot of people just do rounded corners for the sake of rounded corners. There are some websites that need square edges, which makes sense. And then there's other websites where rounded, bubbly effects matters, right? It just depends on the content that you have. So for this, because our wheels are round, obviously, it would make more sense to have more rounded corners. Our handlebars, drop bars are round as well. There's not a whole lot of square in the picture itself. Same thing with the background. Same. It makes sense to have this a little bit rounded, but we also don't want bubbly. So the first thing that we need to do is we need a class on our images. Okay, bike image. Copy, paste, and space. All right, we're going to save here. We're going to come back to our HTML. And then okay, it was bike image. And then we're going to do something called a border radius, like so. And this is where we can, I generally start at 10 pixels. You can do percentiles. I generally find that it doesn't work out very well. So we have 10 pixels here. Bang, right there. This is a little awkward where the corner is white and then the background is white. We can fix that here in a second. So there's 10 pixels. Now, with that said, let's say I don't know where this image is in the DOM. If I right click on it, come over to inspect, it will take me to where this object is located. Caveat. That inspect is only going to take you to the location of the thing that it actually interacted with. So in the web world, there is a concept of what is Z index. So you can have multiple things stacked on top of each other. And if they are invisible to the user, so they can see the image, but let's say there's conceptual things on top of it, it'll take you to the conceptual thing, which can be annoying at times, but sometimes you just can't get around it. You're trying to get an effect, and that's really the only way to do it. Or you're putting a band-aid on something, and that's the only way to do it. Do it cheaply. So there's that. We have our image here, bike image, pictures. Okay, cool. Down here is border radius. So if I was unhappy with how this looks, which I am a little bit, right? So we can literally step in 1 pixel at a time, and it's going to auto update for us. And I like the idea of 5 pixels instead of 10. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go to 5 pixels. All right. I'm going to save. That's going to update. That's now 5. Awesome. The next thing that we need to address is this little awkward corner picture thing. So we have a couple options here. We can change the picture itself, significant amount of work, or we can change the background of the HTML. So if we come up here, right, background color, and then I'm going to do RGB, all right? So if you don't know what RGB stands for, it's red, green, and blue. All right, so I'm going to hover over this. This is going to give me the option to graphically set the color. And I'm going to do 139 is 5. Okay. 239, 239, 239. So this is going to be a light gray. All right, I'm going to save this. Okay, so this background changed to light gray, which is okay. All right, so this blue stand out a little bit more. Black is doing good, but now we can actually see this white corner down here. So that's a little bit more smooth. Same thing with this one down here. So that gray background is doing us a good amount of favors at the moment. And content 1, content 2 was just a demonstration. So, nope. There we go. Now I'm going to save this, content 1, content 2. Now, one of the things I'm noticing at this point is I can scroll to the bottom, but it is literally at the bottom. I don't have any type of way of scrolling this to get it up into a view that's a little bit more comfortable for the user. So this is where we're going to address this check road container. All right, and then we're going to come down here, check road container. We are addressing the ID, which is the pound symbol or hashtag. All right, and then I'm going to add a padding, and this is where you actually have to have padding. So padding, padding bottom. Let's go 5% here. Okay. Let's go a little bit more. Let's go 10. Okay, I like that a little bit more. There we go. So there is that. Now, to demonstrate what I was talking about before, if I do this and I just add margin here, in theory, this should just move up again. And it doesn't. The reason for that is because that vertical container is already taking up its space. So when you try to do more, maybe it did move. Yeah, it did move a little bit. So you can use margin here as well. It seems like that will change under, again, Flexbox and CSS Grid, very, very different things. So we don't have any of those paradigms, and that's part of the reason why I'm going, oh, yeah, I guess that works without those things interfering. So yeah, margin bottom seems to work. Okay, so if you want to go that route, so the biggest advantage between padding and margin, so if you're just trying to move a thing, you can move that around with margin. If you're trying to make a target area bigger than what you can visibly see, padding does that for you. So that's the primary advantage of padding, and that's where the name comes from. Hey, pad this area, this target area. So this is helpful for buttons in particular. So especially when you start getting into accessibility concepts for targeting and Fitts law. So with that said, I think we're going to stop here for the CSS portion. We covered a good bit of stuff. So we changed our heading fonts. We gave a font style. We changed the background for the HTML. We have a different color on our subheaders. We had border radius on our pictures, and we had padding and margins to separate out things. So I think we're doing pretty good. That's a pretty good place to stop for this little project here. Now, when you start getting into your own projects for this semester and what you're going to turn in, you'll find that you end up using these things over and over and over again. And that's part of the reason why I'm stopping here, because it's just an extrapolation of things that you already know. So with that said, we got to go over Flexbox and CSS Grid for this course. And then we will cover databases. And that'll be it for the actual lecture portions of this semester. If you're an Alfred State student, we'll end up doing a lot more practice with these. So that's going to be the primary benefit of taking it in person. All right. So with that said, I will see you in the Flexbox and CSS Grid portion of the lecture. Later.